The church hall smelled faintly of lilies and old varnish. I walked in, clutching the small black clutch Vernon had given me years ago, a piece of him I wasn't ready to let go of. The ushers nodded politely, their eyes skimming past me as though I were another guest, not his wife. One pointed toward a printed seating chart taped against the wall. I scanned it, row by row, name by name. My heart sank. My name wasn't there. When I asked, the usher hesitated, then guided me toward a chair near the dessert table, pressed against the wall. Cold metal beneath the thin fabric cover, far from the family table. The head seat at the center, his seat, stood empty, draped in a black ribbon. The symbolism was sharp, but the sting was sharper. I wasn't at the family table. I sat, confusion burning into humiliation. That chair felt colder than the grave itself. I forced myself to keep breathing, my eyes fixed on the polished wood of Vernon's casket at the front. My palms went damp, my chest tight. They didn't forget me, I told myself. But I knew better. That chair told the truth. It wasn't long before Marlene appeared, Vernon's sister, always perfectly pressed, her lipstick a shade too bright for morning. She leaned down with an air hug, her perfume sharp, her smile polite but lifeless. "You must be tired," she said, the words dressed as sympathy but dripping dismissal. Her hand flicked, and I noticed something gleaming in her palm. Vernon's cufflinks, gold engraved with his initials. My breath caught. "I'll keep these safe," she said casually, slipping them into her purse before I could respond. Safe? For whom? For her? For me? The way she moved, it felt rehearsed. She had already rewritten the script of who belonged where. I smiled faintly, but my chest tightened. I felt the balance tilt, the ground shifting under my feet. She was in control. I was being erased, one gesture at a time. Back at my chair, the sounds of laughter rose from the family table. Plates clinked, chairs scraped, the warmth of shared memory drifting across the room. From where I sat, I could only watch. At one point, a man I barely recognized, distant kin, walked by, thrusting his empty coffee cup at me with a distracted, "Could you top this off?" I froze. For a moment, I almost rose to do it. Then I stopped, staring at the cup, then at him. "I'm his wife," I whispered under my breath. But to him, I was just furniture in the corner. I stared at the polished silver urn beside the dessert table, catching my reflection warped and bent. Humiliation pressed down like a weight across my shoulders. An old family friend, Ruth, leaned in close, her eyes darting around before she whispered, "They're already planning. Marlene wants Chester and Truett to take everything. Properties, accounts, the company." My stomach twisted. "All of it?" My voice cracked. Ruth nodded solemnly. "They're holding an inheritance meeting, tonight, right after this." The words hit harder than the funeral hymns. My grief shifted shape, turning into something darker. Anxiety, dread, but also a strange thread of resolve. They weren't just sidelining me, they were preparing to cut me out completely. It didn't take long for small cruelties to follow. Truett, Marlene's boy, sauntered past with a smirk. "Tough day," he muttered, "but business has to move." That word, move, cut deep, as if Vernon's life, my life with him, was something to be boxed and hauled away. Opal, a cousin with a tongue that never rested, stopped just long enough to murmur, "Well, they say you can't fight family, but looks like family's already fighting you." She moved on, her words like ash in my mouth. I clenched my fists under the table. Bitterness licked at the edges of my grief. For the first time that day, I felt the flicker of defiance. I wandered toward the memorial table. Vernon's photo rested in a simple oak frame, his smile frozen in time. I reached out, straightening it, and let my palm rest against the glass. "They won't erase us," I whispered. My voice barely audible, but firm. My grief hardened into a vow. When the service wound down, the coordinator came around, handing out envelopes, meeting notices for the family. I watched carefully. Each of Marlene's children got one. Chester got one. Even distant relatives. When the stack thinned, I asked quietly, "Is there one for me?" The coordinator checked the list, flipping through the envelopes. "I don't see your name." His hesitation was painful, but the truth was worse. On the top envelope, I noticed handwriting, sharp, neat, unmistakably Marlene's. She had written the names herself. My exclusion wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. The bitter truth sank deep. This wasn't grief playing tricks on me. This was strategy. I walked back across the hall, envelope stack still in view. "I'll be there," I told Marlene flatly. Her smile was thin, her voice coated with sugar. "This is a board matter, Arliss." She used my name like a weapon, as though it were a reminder of my boundaries. I looked her in the eye. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence hang heavy between us. Sometimes silence weighs more than words. That cold chair waited for me again, and I sat down. My eyes burned, not from tears, but from the fire building underneath. The coordinator's envelope stack rustled, and I caught it. My name, written once, then crossed out in thick blue ink. The heat hit me as soon as I stepped outside the church hall. Houston air thickened with humidity, pressing against my dress like another layer of grief. I climbed into the back seat of a waiting ride, clutching my phone. On the screen glared the photo I'd snapped. The envelope stack, my name crossed out in blue ink. That mark wasn't a mistake, it was a decision. Vernon used to tell me, measure twice, cut once. He meant wood and nails, but now it meant words and proof. I whispered it under my breath as I zoomed in on that blue cross. Grief is love with nowhere to go, I reminded myself. So I aimed mine at facts. I texted Shanda, one of Vernon's assistants, telling her I was heading to the office. She wrote back fast. "Still here? Holler if you need me." I tucked the phone into my bag and looked out the window at the tower rising ahead. No tears, no scenes, just records. Paper doesn't lie, even when people do. The lobby gleamed with glass and steel, the kind of cold shine Vernon once said cost more than it returned. A receptionist behind a white counter asked for my meeting pass. "I'm Vernon's widow," I answered plainly, handing her my driver's license. She glanced at her screen, scrolling through a list. My name wasn't there. "Best I can do is a guest badge," she said, already reaching under the desk. "Who made the list?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to me, then away. "Marlene." I signed the visitor's log with deliberate strokes. Arliss v. Widow. I circled the time. Paper leaves trails. As I slid the pen back, I caught one of the security guards staring at my black dress, at the funeral pin still fixed to my chest. He finally waved me toward the elevators. "Boardroom, level 28. They could fence me out with titles, but I was still walking in. At the elevator bank, an assistant rushed forward, badge in hand. She clipped it onto me without looking. I glanced down. The badge read, "Widow of Vernon." Not my name, not even initials, just a role, stripped to a shadow. "I'll need that corrected," I said. She shrugged. "Pre-printed. Sorry." There was no apology in her tone. I lifted my phone and snapped a photo. Time, date, location captured, receipts mattered. A thought landed heavy. When people rename you, they're already halfway to removing you. I pressed my palm against the badge, then slid it into my pocket. I would introduce myself properly when it counted. The doors opened to the boardroom floor. Marlene stood waiting, lips curved in something between pity and triumph. "This is a board matter," she said again, soft this time, as if coaxing a child. "I'm here to listen," I replied. Her eyes flicked to the badge and lingered, satisfied. Chester hovered behind her, Ty strangling his throat. Truett leaned on the wall, tapping his phone with a smirk. "Put it in the minutes that I attended," I told her evenly. Her blink was quick, almost a flinch. Control resists daylight. She pulled the door open, sweeping her hand toward a chair by the wall. I stood for a beat longer, then stepped inside. The boardroom table stretched wide, polished until it reflected every overhead light. Marlene slid a thick binder toward me, her hand steady, her nails perfect. "To move forward," she said smoothly. "Sign here, here, and here." Bright tabs marked pages. I flipped one open. My name appeared only as surviving spouse, non-board. The cover sheet read, "Waiver and Release of Claims." "I won't sign what I haven't read," I said. My voice was even, my hand firm on the binder. "And I'll need a copy to review." Truett laughed through his nose. We're all grieving. No need to make this hard. Hard, I said quietly, is burying your husband and getting handed a waiver. Silence fell heavy. Paper cuts sting, even when they don't bleed. The assistant began typing minutes, calling me guest observer. Record my full name, I corrected. She hesitated until Marlene gave a small nod, like a monarch approving a subject. Then the correction appeared on the screen. Chester leaned forward, muttering about vendors and deadlines. We can't stall. Then cite the bylaws, I replied. Show me where this authority sits. Someone muttered, just housekeeping today. They wanted to sweep me out with the dust. I typed each phrase into my phone. Brandeis once said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Today, my phone was sunlight. The badge still pressed into my collarbone like a reminder not to bend. Marlene pushed again. Sign by end of day. Texas is a community property state, I said, looking straight at her. Responsible means I read before I sign. Truitt rolled his eyes. Chester avoided mine, staring at the grain of the wood table. They wanted a stamp, not a partner. I slid the binder back across the table. Calm, no drama. Send me a PDF and a hard copy. I'll review. My phone buzzed. A text from Shanda. In the archives if you need me. Marlene snapped the binder shut, her smile sharp. Board-only session now. Then note my departure, I said, and that I requested copies, and that my name was misprinted. The assistant muttered, duly noted. I unclipped the badge and set it on the table. Labels can be temporary. Names are not. Walking out, I felt the door snap shut behind me, but not on me. The elevator hummed open. As it closed, my phone buzzed again. Shanda's message lit the screen. 4 words that split the day in 2. Found his original will. I told the elevator to wait and sprinted back toward the archives. Shanda stood at the door with her badge in hand, shoulders tight. She explained fast. It wasn't the will itself she'd found, but an index entry, a trail that proved it existed. Proof mattered, even when paper stayed locked away. She swiped us in. The room was cool and smelled like toner and cardboard. We logged into the system, her access giving us entry to files that had outlived people. She rolled out a carton with Vernon's initials scrawled across the side. A chain of custody sheet hung from it, taped and signed. I slid my funeral gloves back on, more out of habit than need. Paper cuts tell stories, I muttered, half to her, half to myself. We agreed we wouldn't cross the line, only copy what policy allowed. Integrity mattered, even when the ground was tilting under my feet. Shanda clicked through the index. Lines of text scrolled past, black on white. She froze, then pointed. Estate, amended minutes, title transfers, beneficiary notes. One entry was redacted, a black bar where a name had been. The metadata showed it had been altered last night. I leaned in. Who touched this? She tapped the editor initials. They belonged to the same assistant who had pinned that badge on me earlier. I printed the audit log, timestamp bold across the top. Facts first, feelings later. My pulse stayed steady, but my teeth pressed together until my jaw ached. Truth leaves fingerprints. This page was smudged with them. We opened an older file. There it was. My full name, printed clean, tied to joint property schedules. Not a widow, not an observer. My name. Then we compared it to the current file. Blank space where I had been. A void. White and merciless. I circled the gap with a pen. Erasure isn't an accident. It's intent, Shanda whispered. They can't do that without counsel. I set the pages side by side and photographed them. Before and after, presence and absence, a wound in ink. My pulse slowed, sharper than anger. Pain turned into precision. We gathered a packet, logs, copies, version history. I added the visitor log with my name scrawled across it. The story needed a spine, and I was building one, sheet by sheet. Shanda suggested sealing the packet and sending a digest to myself. I nodded. Timestamps mattered. I forwarded it all to Delbert, Vernon's old attorney. Subject line, unauthorized alterations, urgent. I added a single line, trust is good, but paper is better. We slid everything back in place. We didn't steal, we witnessed. That mattered. Stepping out into the hallway, I nearly collided with Chester. He looked worn, his tie hanging loose, his face pale under the fluorescent light. He lowered his voice like we were co-conspirators. "Arlise, do the right thing," he murmured. "Sign and let it go. We're all tired." I heard that word, we. It didn't include me. "Doing right and doing easy aren't twins," I said. He darted a look down the hall. "Marlene just wants stability." "Stability without legality is theater," I answered, "and everyone knows the curtains always fall." He winced, like the words hit him harder than he expected. "Still," he pressed, "it'll look bad if you fight. People will say you're bitter." I didn't flinch. People already mistook me for catering staff at my husband's funeral. His eyes dropped. "What do you want?" "My name where it belongs. And time to read." He offered me a compromise. A stipend, a goodbye clause, no voice in the company. "Peace isn't hush money," I said. "It's fairness." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Think on it." Then he gestured toward a side room. Inside, the assistant laid down a single page, freshly printed, still warm, a simplified waiver. "What's the version number?" I asked. She blinked. "I don't know." I placed my packet on the table, sliding the two documents forward, old and new, name and no name. "Add this to the next recorded session," I said. "And note, I refuse to sign anything tonight." The assistant looked toward the door, waiting for Marlene's shadow. None came. Silence stitched itself across the room. I let it hold. I emailed myself again, this time with attachments CC'd to Delbert. Subject, preservation request. I asked the assistant to freeze edits until counsel arrived. Chester rubbed his temples. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I met his eyes. "Bigger than erasing a widow's name? No. This is exactly the size it needs to be." I gathered my packet. The smell of toner and fear clinging to the air. The hum of the building sounded like a jury deliberating. I stepped into the corridor and reached for the handle to the larger boardroom. That's when I heard Truitt's voice inside, sharp and careless. She was just a wife. Now she has nothing. I walked into the boardroom without waiting for the laughter to finish dying in the air. The city lights pressed against the glass walls, but inside the room felt close and stale. Marlene sat at the head of the table like she was born there. Chester hovered by the projector, pretending to be useful, and Truitt leaned back against the credenza, casual as a boy in a locker room. I said it clear, letting my voice cut through the shuffle of chairs. "Record that I'm present, first and last name." The minute-taker hesitated, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. I set my phone face up on the table, dark screen, camera off. Just the sight of it made people straighten in their seats. My hand rested on the edge of the polished wood, not clenched, just steady. I repeated in my head what Vernon used to quote, "Facts are stubborn things." Then Truitt smirked, repeating his line from the hall, softer now, like it was meant to sting deeper. She was just a wife. A couple of directors looked away, studied the floor or the skyline. People always find ceilings when truth walks in. I turned my eyes on him. "A wife under Texas law is a co-owner. Put that in the minutes." He barked out a laugh. "Look at you making this ugly." "Ugly," I said evenly, "is erasing a name." I nodded to the recorder. "Read back the last two lines." The assistant stuttered, then complied, voice trembling as she spoke both our words into the air. The sting hardened into steel. The laughter shrank into silence. That's when I noticed Marlene's wrist. A glint of gold, the leather band darkened from years of sweat and sun. Vernon's watch. The nick across the face at 7 o'clock. Only I would know how it got there. A ladder slip on a roofing job, the summer we couldn't afford contractors. She stroked it as she talked, a practice gesture, as if to tell the room it had always belonged to her. "I'm safeguarding what matters," she said. I kept my voice calm, level. "That watch was in our bedroom armoire this morning." A low murmur spread. Someone whispered, "Is that appropriate?" Marlene smiled without warmth. "We're family." "Family honors the dead," I answered, "not raids their drawers." I leaned toward the minute-taker. "List item, Vernon's watch currently in Marlene's possession, pending inventory. Marlene's face tightened, but she didn't speak. I pressed further. State my full legal name and status as surviving spouse and co-owner. The assistant glanced at Marlene like a child waiting for a nod. I cut her off. You don't need permission to be accurate. Her fingers tapped reluctantly. Chester cleared his throat, muttering about decorum. Decorum follows law, not the other way around, I replied. I slid a copy of the visitor log onto the table, my signature staring up from it. And include that my badge tonight read, widow of, not my name. Note that I object. Her lips pressed thin, but she typed it. And the story was bending back toward its rightful center. Marlene rose, smoothing her skirt, and reached for the door. Board-only session now. Cite the bylaw, I said. The silence that followed was her answer. One director coughed. Let's keep this civil. Civil, I said, is transparency. My palms rested on the table, flat, no tremor. If they wanted to force me out, they'd have to put it in writing. If you exclude me, note that exclusion, and by whose order. The door stayed open. Small wins count. I asked to project the agenda. The assistant complied, cursor blinking on the screen like a heartbeat. One by one, I asked questions. What decisions, under what authority, which assets touched? Truitt sighed like a boy dragged to chores. I ignored him. Adults were speaking. I made sure the record caught everything. Waivers disguised as memos, renaming passed off as clerical. When people rename you, I said, eyes fixed on the minutes, they're halfway to removing you. Note the renaming. The room felt exposed, and sometimes exposure is enough to keep hands clean. Silence stretched, humming through the vents. I let it linger before I turned to Marlene. You may run the room, but you don't own the truth. She tilted her head, sweet as syrup. We only want stability. Then do it in daylight, I answered. Daylight doesn't hurt honest people. No one moved. The skyline behind us looked like a jury waiting on a verdict. I didn't break. The break would have served them. Finally, I requested copies of all materials, print and PDF, within 24 hours. I repeated that I would not sign without counsel. Peace isn't a signature, I said. Peace is fairness. The minute-taker repeated my words aloud as she typed. I nodded once. In my mind, I made a note. Go home, check the study, check the armoire. If Marlene had the watch, what else was gone? I stepped back from the table, not in retreat, but in direction. No applause. I hadn't played for it. When the elevator opened, I curled my palm around my house key. It felt heavier than metal, like it remembered where the rest of my answers were. The house greeted me with its silence, heavier than usual, as though it knew it had been entered by only one of us now. I set my heels by the mat, toes pointed toward the door, like they might want to leave again. The hallway runner sagged in its familiar dip. Vernon used to joke it was the house's spine, bent but steady. I clicked on just one lamp in the study. The shadows stayed loyal. They didn't flatter or lie. The armoire drawer was open a crack, the one where Vernon always tucked his watch. I already knew what I would find there, absence. I switched my phone off. I needed to hear the woods settle, the cicadas outside, the breath of this room that had seen every draft and decision. Grief is love with nowhere to go, I whispered, letting it guide me to his desk. I pulled out the chair, its creak old and familiar, and sat down like I was reporting for duty. I slid open the center drawer and touched the uneven plank beneath. Vernon always laughed about hiding things where the honest wouldn't think to look. My fingers found the edge of a cedar box, no bigger than a shoebox, smelling faintly of sawdust and years. Inside, folded neat, a letter addressed to my wife. A small brass key hung on a blue cord and a sticky note with 3 numbers in Vernon's handwriting. The loops in his R, the sharp tail on his V, he wrote like a man who refused shortcuts. My chest tightened. I smoothed the paper flat, hesitated just long enough to remind myself this wasn't hunting. It was listening. The seal cracked softly as I opened it. The letter began with what mattered. Love. Not the pretty kind, but the steady kind. Thanking me for stubborn years, For every morning I made sure he had a clean shirt, for not walking away when things leaned hard. Then his voice shifted, practical as always. He wrote about updating his will last spring, how Delbert had a certified copy, how he had left me a trail. The numbers were the code. A small safe, hidden behind the framed blueprint of our first duplex. He teased me, trust, but verify, like he knew I'd smile even through tears. He warned me about Marlene's circling, not about grief, about governance. He asked me to keep Shanda close because she remembered the beginnings, not just the endings. And at the end, his instruction was clear, unvarnished. Don't argue. Document. I rose, lifted the blueprint gently from the wall, and there it was. A safe no larger than a bread box. The key slid in clean, turned with a quiet click. Inside waited a USB drive, a notarized inventory list, and a Polaroid of us, younger, standing under the first sign for Vernon's company. His arm around me, my smile carrying more trust than worry. I snapped photos of the contents before touching them. Context mattered. I plugged the USB into his old desktop, the fan groaning awake. Folders appeared. Estate, bylaws, board binder, originals. Date stamped last spring. My name printed, black and clear, alongside his on property schedules. I copied everything to an encrypted drive, labeled it with tonight's date, then returned each item to its exact place. Stealing was their game. Witnessing was mine. A knock broke the stillness. Shanda stood on the porch, envelope under her arm, eyes darting down the street like she knew shadows had ears. She stepped in, laid the manila folder on the desk. "Certified copy," she said. "Delbert had me hold it. Didn't want it sitting at the office tonight." We put on gloves, careful. She explained chain of custody, when it was sealed, who witnessed, where it had been stored. We opened it. The older will mirrored Vernon's letter. My name, my role, provisions for the board, and even the charity commitments he'd insisted on. I thanked her not with tears, but with steadiness. She understood. That was our shared language. I laid the certified copy against the USB printouts. Page by page, I compared section numbers, notary stamps, addenda, and then I thought about the waiver packet Marlene had slid across the polished table earlier. Side by side, the lies were almost insultingly plain. I photographed every embossed seal, time-stamped each one, and initialed the photos. Shanda texted Delbert, a simple line, "Preservation request tomorrow morning." For a heartbeat, the quiet offered me surrender. Sign, settle, sleep. Let someone else fight. But I pictured the cold chair at the funeral, the badge that erased my name, the watch ticking on another wrist. Vernon's words came back. "Don't argue. Document." I texted Delbert. "Ready when you are." His reply came quick. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring originals." I placed Vernon's letter back in the cedar box, closed the lid with both hands. The house exhaled, and so did I, not in defeat, but in anchor. I gathered what mattered. A slim packet of audit logs, version comparisons, USB index printouts, a custody summary. I locked the USB in the safe, left the certified copy in Shanda's care. On the desk, I lined up the cedar box, the letter, and the Polaroid. My map. "Courage is grace under pressure," I murmured. Hemingway's line, but Vernon had lived it. I set my alarm for dawn, turned my phone face down, and let the lamp go dark. In that blackness, I touched my wedding band, cold against my palm, and made a promise. Tomorrow, fewer words, more records. Before sleep found me, my phone buzzed. The screen lit with her name. Marlene's message. "Board only, at 9. Don't embarrass yourself." I woke before the alarm and let the first light in. Houston's sky was pale, the kind that makes you think it hasn't decided what kind of day it wants to be. On the nightstand sat the cedar box, my ring beside it. I slid the band back on slowly, like it was both shield and promise. Vernon's words echoed, the ones he'd written just for me. "Don't argue. Document." The packet lay ready on the table, lean, sharp, enough to cut without looking like a weapon. Audit logs. Version comparisons, a clean index of the USB, nothing more, nothing less. My phone stayed on Do Not Disturb, except for Shanda and Delbert. They were the only voices I'd answer today. I brewed 1 cup of coffee, black, no sugar. Comfort wasn't the point. Focus was. Measure twice, cut once, I muttered, remembering Vernon's job site mantra. Dawn had rules. Mine was clarity. Delbert texted before I'd finished half the cup. Board moved to 9 sharp. Meet 8:20 in lobby. That was his way of telling me we'd play by our clock, not Marlene's. I set the mug down, snapped a photo of my packet laid out neat on the kitchen table, another timestamp for the record. I checked the wall safe, just to be sure, USB untouched, still locked inside. The cicadas were fading into the thrum of traffic as I locked the front door. Marlene's late-night text still sat unanswered. Silence was my reply. The tower's lobby was cool, brass directory gleaming, voices echoing like they didn't want to settle. Delbert stood by the wall, legal pad already open, not a wasted move. We didn't sit. Standing kept the blood sharp. I laid out everything for him. Badge misprint, blue crossout, altered PDFs, waiver packet, custody path. He underlined editor IDs, circled timestamps, his shorthand as blunt as his tone. Say less, document more, he said, eyes flicking up at me. Strategy confirmed. He pulled a sheet from his pad. Preservation notice, his letterhead. He'd walk it in once I'd planted my own presence. Between us, one line carried more weight than any speech. If it's not on paper, it didn't happen. At the elevator, I turned my wedding ring once around my finger. An anchor. An oath. My heart steadied with the ritual. I snapped a screenshot of the clock on my lock screen, proof of the moment. Delbert stayed behind, waiting for his cue. I smoothed my sleeve, not for vanity, but to make stillness read as strength. The doors opened, and level 28's glass walls gave me the skyline, cold and watchful. Marlene sat at the head, back straight, lips already shaping control. Truett leaned, too casual, by the credenza. Chester hunched, eyes darting anywhere but mine. I didn't take the wall chair. I stepped to the table and set my packet down like it belonged. Please note my presence by full legal name, I said, even and unhurried. The minute-taker hesitated. I waited. Silence spread until keys finally tapped. Arlise, let's be efficient, Marlene said, sugar-coated steel. Efficiency follows accuracy, I replied. Accuracy first. My voice stayed calm, not sharp. I asked for the bylaw that excluded a widow co-owner from a board session. Marlene offered custom. I met her gaze and said, custom isn't policy. The assistant shifted in her seat. I asked her to read back my last 2 requests. She did, and the air grew tighter. I slid an envelope forward. Delbert's notice. Preservation of all drafts, metadata, and edits since last spring. Council notified. Truett muttered. Lawyer games. I let it die there, starved for attention. Chester rubbed at his temple, worn thin by pressure he didn't know how to manage. I didn't accuse, I listed waiver language, badge misprint, deleted line on the current schedule, older schedule preserved, all facts, not arguments. Then I made the ask. Copies of every agenda exhibit today. PDF and print, with version numbers visible. I ended with my line in the sand. I will not sign tonight. The minute-taker typed it back, word for word. I nodded once. One director finally asked, Are you planning to litigate? I intend to comply with the will my husband executed, I said. Nothing more. The room went quiet again, and I let it stay that way. Silence worked for me now. When I gathered my packet, it was clear nothing more could be gained here, except a footprint on the record. Deliver exhibits to council, I said, stepping back from the table. Not retreat, just direction. As I left, Delbert stepped in. His envelope landed on the table with a sound soft but final. I didn't look back. Their faces weren't my business. The hallway was... My phone vibrated. Shanda. One more thing in the basement archives. You'll want to see. I touched my ring once before the elevator doors closed. Not habit. A signal. A chapter turning. I let the elevator rise without me and turned back toward the archives. The basement smelled of paper dust and chilled air, the kind that hums against your skin. Shanda was waiting with her badge in hand, shoulders squared. We logged in, the custody sheet spread open, her pen neat as ever. She keyed into the workstation, and the gray screen bloomed with file names. Property schedule org.tif, she said, clicking twice. A scanned deed filled the monitor, the county clerk's block stamped solid at the bottom. Vernon's name, my name, side by side, black ink that didn't care about rumor. I raised my phone and caught the screen in a frame with the wall clock, time and proof in one shot. In Texas, I said, more to myself than to her, what's recorded is what matters. The law likes ink, not whispers. Shanda printed the deed and stapled the metadata page behind it. She added a cover sheet with today's date, logged in her tight hand. I asked her to send the PDF straight from the archive terminal to Delbert, CC me, chain of custody intact. No personal devices, no cracks in the wall. She tapped another note on the index. County certified copy pending. Clerk's office will push it this afternoon. We filled out the request, both of us signing. I slipped the printed deed into my packet, behind the audit logs. A spine was forming. Possession is 9/10 of the law, I told her, but the 10th keeps you out of court. She smiled without showing teeth. At the lobby kiosk, I thought I had 10 minutes for coffee. Opal caught me first. Arlise, she sang out too loud. Folks say you were Vernon's second choice for executor. Is that true? Her tone carried, heads turned. Security leaned an elbow on the rail. 2 assistants from upstairs froze mid-sip. Gossip has its own PA system. I set my cup down. No, Opal. He named me, in writing. Her cheeks burned pink. I didn't mean just what people say. Say this instead, I answered. When a man dies, rumor moves into his chair unless the truth does. I didn't flash the deed. I didn't need to. The sentence did the work. Eyes dropped. Opal fiddled with her sleeve, embarrassed enough to step back. Delbert met me under the brass directory, legal pad balanced against his arm. I slid the fresh print beneath it. He scanned, nodded once. We wait for the county seal, he said. Today we speak in requests, not accusations. He jotted a line for the minutes. Widow asserts co-ownership, requests exhibits and preservation. Strategy was simple. No fireworks until the seal arrived. Quiet now. Thunder later. I pocketed the note, the paper warm from his hand. My chest felt steady, not light, but anchored. Upstairs, the corridor carried its own weather. Truitt leaned against the wall, scrolling, smirk sharpened like a blade. Chester adjusted his tie, eyes sliding away from me. Marlene was all poise, smile polished flat. The minute-taker flicked glances between us, trying to read which way the air bent. I touched my ring once, anchor against my finger, then stepped forward. Vernon's voice from old slab days filled me. Make it level, then make it last. Inside, I didn't wait for permission. I laid my packet on the table, palm resting on the cover page. My voice carried even, clear. Please enter into the minutes that my full legal name appears on the recorded deed with Vernon. I remain a co-owner. Marlene's smile stiffened. Truitt's jaw flexed. One director coughed like the air had thinned. I kept going. I request copies of all agenda exhibits by day's end, PDF and print, version numbers visible. No theatrics, just nails tapped one by one into the frame. The minute-taker's keys clattered, and the sound might as well have been a gavel. Marlene tried to twist. We're only discussing company operations, not marital relics. Titles aren't relics, I told her. They're rails. We stay on them, or we fall. Another director leaned forward. Do you plan to block today's vote? I plan to follow Vernon's will, I said. Period. I didn't chase their faces. I planted fact after fact like stakes in the ground. Silence settled, heavy, dust after a saw cut. Nobody liked the echo, but I left it. My phone buzzed in my palm. Delbert's text. County copy en route. Seal confirmed. I set the phone face down. Timing mattered. I'll await today's exhibits, I said for the record, and I'll respond through counsel. I gathered my packet. Nothing more to offer without the seal. As I reached the corridor, Marlene's voice floated after me, sugar hiding the blade. Board only at 4. I didn't turn. Then bring a board that reads. Delbert's next buzz reached me before the elevator, certified copy in hand. Ready when you are. I came back to level 28 2 minutes early. The skyline outside glowed like a jury box lit gold and steel, the day leaning toward night. I touched my wedding ring once, anchor steady against my skin, then placed my packet on the table without sitting. The minute-taker confirmed my name for the record without glancing toward Marlene. Progress, even if tiny. I ask that council's presence in the hall be noted, I said, calm but plain. The assistant typed, chairs scraped. Truitt lounged careless in his chair. Chester cinched his tie one more notch. Marlene just smiled, her face smooth as glass. I inhaled for 4, exhaled for 4. Vernon's old phrase repeating inside, steady hands pour straight. Then came the envelope. Crisp, deliberate, slid across the table by Marlene. To avoid confusion, she purred, here is Arliss's signed transfer from last month. I opened it. A notarized-looking waiver, my name spelled wrong once, corrected everywhere else. The stamp was wrong, the seal font off. She fanned copies for the room. She consented to step away, for peace. The word peace stung more than the forgery. Peace isn't handed in envelopes. I studied the commission number, wrong for this year's format. Calm, I asked the minutes to record title and date of the document and the name of the person presenting it. My chest was hot but caged. This wasn't a hornet's nest I'd swat. This was one for the beekeeper. I request a certified record of that notary's commission, I said evenly. And note for the record, I contest authenticity and request council inspection. Truitt snorted. She's calling people criminals now. I let it die in the air. Silence can starve lies better than argument. I restated once, clear as stone. I remain a co-owner unless a valid transfer exists. The keys clicked. Marlene's smile thinned. Under the table, I texted one word to Delbert. Now. He entered moments later, folder thin, step measured. Silver hair, calm eyes, voice like iron wrapped in felt. He placed a preservation notice on the table. Council requests all drafts, metadata, and notary logs for the document presented. He read the commission number aloud, then added, that commission expired 2 years ago. The room leaned, almost physically. A director coughed. Chester's pen rolled off the table. No one picked it up. I said nothing. Delbert didn't need me. Marlene's smile flickered like a light losing current. Then came the wait. Delbert unfolded a trifold, laid it flat. The county-certified deed with raised seal, clerk's letter stapled behind. Feel the seal, he told the minute-taker. Note tactile verification, he read. Recorded owners of record, Vernon, full name, and Arliss, full name, community property with survivorship. Marlene reached for her envelope, as if the forged paper might still breathe. Delbert placed a gloved finger on the date. This alleged transfer comes after the recorded deed, with an expired commission. He added one more page, will addendum, Vernon's executor confirmation, charitable set aside, my seat rights preserved. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, proof-shaped. I looked at Marlene's wrist. The watch glinted, scar at 7 catching the overhead light. For the inventory, I said quietly, please note Vernon's watch is present and will be returned to the estate box. She hesitated, then unclasped it, stiff fingers working the buckle. She set it on the table. I placed it beside the certified deed. Together, they looked like truth in 2 forms, steel and paper. Truitt muttered. Chester studied the carpet like it might testify for him. A director asked if this changed operational urgency. I answered, urgency never outruns legality. Delbert proposed a process vote. Preserve, produce, reconvene with council review. Marlene tried one more turn. Board only at 4. I kept my voice plain. Cite the bylaw, or record the refusal. The assistant looked to Delbert. He just nodded at the keyboard. Paper beats memory, I added softly. Let's remember correctly. The pivot collapsed. Only process stood upright. A chair was offered at the side, but I pulled out the empty one at the center. No fanfare, just gravity falling back into place. The minute taker read aloud. Ownership, addendum, preservation orders. Watch returned. I signed the attendance sheet with my full name. Ink dried where erasure had tried to live. Through the glass, dusk slid down the skyline. A verdict written in color. I let breath out slow. This wasn't victory, it was correction. As the room emptied, Marlene leaned close. Her whisper was steady, not threat, but blueprint. You won tonight. Tomorrow I take your name. The courthouse didn't move quickly, but it moved honestly. Delbert and I took a number and sat beneath a clock that ticked slow, refusing to be hurried. I watched him file the county-certified deed and Vernon's will addendum, page by page, each one kissed by the clerk's raised seal and docket number. It felt like hearing a bell that only rings once in a lifetime. We added a preservation motion and a notice of suspected tampering. My role was simple: sign the affidavit, trace the timeline, list the chain of custody. I wrote a note in the margin for myself. Paper beats memory. Delbert leaned close and reminded me, courts don't want speeches, they want maps. He was right. This wasn't about winning ground. It was about repairing it. My grief sat steady, no longer wild. The clerk handed Delbert a short acknowledgement, the kind of paper most folks would ignore, but I knew its weight. Widow recognized. Executor confirmed. Docket number printed bold across the top. The law had just spoken my name out loud. Delbert scanned it, then emailed it to the board list with the subject line. Status clarified. Executor ownership. No perfume, no decoration, just fact. I forwarded it to Shanda. Her reply was one word. Standing. I set a reminder for the formal hearing, the date falling right next to Vernon's birthday on my calendar. I stared at the two side by side, no longer asking, just telling. Back at the tower, I didn't go upstairs first. I walked with Delbert straight to security and HR. My voice was steady as I laid down the docket acknowledgement and the seal. Preserve logs, restrict admin edits, hold board documents. HR acted fast. Suspension on Marlene's unilateral approvals, every access change requiring dual authorization now. Compliance audit scheduled with an outside firm, dates pinned down before anyone could talk their way around them. Receipts stacked up, one by one. This wasn't theater, this was plumbing. Tightening the leaks before the water ruined the foundation, the board reconvened, and this time I sat at the table, not the wall. The minute taker began with my name, my status, the docket number. It echoed through the room like a small verdict. I made 3 requests, every draft produced, version numbers on exhibits, and all votes limited to operations, not ownership. Truitt leaned back, muttering about optics. Optics follow facts, I said without raising my tone. Delbert laid the acknowledgement down for the record. One director nodded, the kind of nod you give when you can finally breathe. HR read out the interim controls, neutral, but it landed like a fence post. Authority didn't need noise, it just needed to stand. Marlene tried her last card. She leaned forward, voice syrupy. We're protecting the company from grief-driven decisions. I kept my eyes level. The company is protected by bylaws and law. Both have names and numbers now. She flicked at donor concerns. I slid Vernon's charitable set aside across the table. His words, his ink. Chester coughed out a compromise about a stipend and a quiet goodbye clause. I looked straight at him. Peace isn't hush money. Peace is fairness. The words landed. Some in the room looked lighter, others cornered. I let silence grow. It knows how to separate people better than shouting. Then security arrived, calm as ushers, HR at their side, suspension notices in hand, key cards deactivated, IT, confirming remote access closed, devices sealed in chain of custody envelopes. Delbert cited policy, not vengeance. No one raised a voice. Marlene stood tall, chin stiff, but the current had shifted. I kept my eyes on the minutes. Truitt whispered something under his breath, but it fell flat. They were escorted out, no spectacle. Just doors closing like periods. Justice doesn't always shout. It can walk quietly, step by step. out of the room. The meeting bent toward what it should have been all along: building, not brawling. Vendor contracts, payroll timelines, safety reports, the housing wing Vernon fought to keep alive. I proposed the Vernon Arliss Scholarship, funded by the set-aside he left. The vote passed without pause. I returned his watch to the estate box, HR logging the chain of custody. Shanda smiled once, not wide, but real. I signed the minutes, steady hand, full name. The ink dried where others had tried to erase me. That night at home, I placed the watch in the cedar box beside Vernon's letter. The smell of cedar carried me back to steadier days, when our plans were still blueprints. I rotated my wedding ring once, then let it rest still. Anchor fulfilled, not gone. I wrote 3 lines on a card for the desk. Don't argue. Document, build. A simple creed, nothing lofty. I texted the team my thanks and one boundary. We move on paper, we speak in facts. Through the window, Houston hummed in its ordinary way. Cars, sirens, cicadas, no spotlight, no music, just life, pressing forward the way it always does. Grief had been wild, tearing, endless. Now it had a job, stewardship, to carry Vernon's name where it belonged, and to keep mine where it was written to stay. As I reached to turn off the lamp, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't know lit the screen. State Notary Commission. They wanted to schedule my statement. The fight wasn't over, but it was honest now.